Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Omnibus Podcast with Jeremy Munson and Walter Hudson. This week on the podcast, we'll be talking about the mask mandates coming back into the schools and perhaps even a statewide mask mandate or directed county-by-county mandate from the governor as he decides whether or not he's going to issue a new emergency. Walter Hudson will give us an update from the first conservative fundraiser of the political season and to talk about how upset conservatives are. I'll talk about Dr. Dan Feehan, world-renowned virologist and epidemiologist, and his response to helping us with COVID. And then we're going to talk about John Thompson not resigning, choosing not to resign. And if we have time, Walter Hudson will talk about some deep thoughts on politics here on the Omnibus Podcast, where all subjects are germane. Everything comes to the floor in such a hyper-partisan manner. I would argue that it's already in the Constitution. We've overtaxed people. People like to legislate by emotion. It's important to address when the governor oversteps his boundaries. I'll pull up my pocket version here. 1,000-page omnibus bills that nobody knows what's in it. All right, Walter, I want to just jump into it this week because there's a lot of scary news coming out about COVID or the variants for COVID. Actually, it's not really scary news about the variants. The scary news is that government is kind of dusting off the emergency power grab and trying to determine if they can just roll these mandates on again, perhaps just to take control over the people again. Maybe it's about elections and trying to figure out how they can change the election laws again next year by rushing us through an emergency. Maybe a bunch of lobbyists want some more handouts for stuff. Maybe the unemployed people just want to keep on staying unemployed. But we saw that the CDC reversed its guidelines on masks, saying, well, you should wear masks now, and even if you're vaccinated. And so that recommendation for schools especially started triggering Rochester Public Schools, already voted to have masks in the fall. Mandatory masks for everybody 12 and under. If you're over the age of 12, it's an option. If you are vaccinated, you can go without a mask. But if you're not vaccinated, you have to wear a mask. And then, of course, teachers who should all be vaccinated, they don't have to wear masks. So that's at the Rochester Public Schools. And that type of mandate is, we'll call it guidelines. But we know that last year when the guidelines went in, all of the school boards fell into line. The teachers union came out and said, you'll do this. And school boards were afraid that they were going to lose funding if they went against the guidelines. So call it a mandate, call it guidelines, but it's coming in the fall for public schools.
Yeah, I had a thread on this on one of my social media pages, and one of the lefties who frequents my comment sections made the point of, well, it's just a recommendation. I mean, you guys are talking about this like it's a mandate. It's just a recommendation. And my comment back to him was, that's one of the dumbest insights I've heard expressed. It's as if you just landed from a decades-long space flight and have no idea what's transpired over the past, couple of years. Yes, absolutely. Recommendations, guidelines are always where they start. That's what they point to when the shutdown comes, when the mandate comes, when they start interfering in your civil liberties and overriding your constitutional rights. And you're absolutely right. These lower levels of government, these lesser magistrates, these school boards, these city councils, always defer to the sage wisdom of whatever authority has declared that this is how you ought to go. And their advisors on staff, the attorneys, the county attorneys, the city attorneys, whatever attorneys advising the school board, is always going to say, you are exposing yourself to liability if you do not conform your policy with the recommendations of this authority on the subject. And so absolutely, this is going to be coming down the pike. And I'll tell you what, the only way we're going to battle it successfully is by not bluffing, but meaning it when we say it, actually saying, hey, you do this, my kid's out of school. In fact, I've got bad news for the podcast. Bad news for this podcast, bad news for Bella D'Angelo, who I also do a podcast with every week. If my school district implements this, or if Governor Walz comes out again and mandates that my kids got to put face diapers on again in order to go back to school this year, I'm going to have to quit everything I'm doing other than work and homeschooling, because that's what I'm going to have to do. I'm not going to subject my kids to this again. And you couple this with the CRT nonsense and just the general lack of legitimate educational purpose that we see our school districts being applied to. That's going to be the straw that breaks this particular camel's back.
Well, and even if you don't care about the masks and you'll tolerate the masks and you'll send your kids to school with masks, the distraction from the masks and the social distancing and everything that went on with COVID, it hurt their education. The kids are behind almost an entire year because of COVID, not because of COVID, because of the government's response to COVID. And one of the things we're also not addressing, you mentioned that the attorneys get involved and say, well, you're taking on a liability if a kid gets sick and dies from COVID and you didn't have a masking policy. It could be argued that perhaps masking could reduce their chance of contracting it by 1/3%. And, so you could be blamed. What about for the kids that they're saying they should be getting vaccinated? Don't they also own a liability for vaccination? Don't they also own a liability for the kid that fell on the ice and because they were wearing a mask and passed out, or that kind of stuff? Don't they also own a liability for that?
Of course not. And for the same reason, right? Because they can always say, well, we were just following the CDC's guidelines. So what that your kid asphyxiated on the hockey rink? That's not our fault. The CDC said this is what we ought to be doing, and we can't think for ourselves. What would you have us do? That's the answer that they're going to come back with. And it's a line of reasoning and a thought process that is successful in modern American jurisprudence. If it comes before a court and you just appeal to the authority, not make a rational argument based upon data, but appeal to the authority of, well, the CDC said, you're probably going to be the one who comes out on top, regardless of whether you were morally and objectively right or wrong.
Yeah. Well, I got in a little spat with Pat Garofalo today. He posted on his Pat Garofalo for State Representative Facebook page, due to the work of many dedicated individuals, the legislature was able to repeal Governor Walz's emergency powers. Thank you to all those who worked to stop one-man control. Without your work, Tim Walz would be imposing a mask mandate on all students. Thank you for helping stop this from happening. And he shared this little graphic that says, but because Governor Tim Walz no longer retains emergency powers that allowed the state mandate earlier in the pandemic, decisions about masking, social distancing, and other precautionary measures will be left to the school districts. Well, I basically copied his post, screenshotted it, and I photoshopped it to make it look like Facebook had said it was fake news, and put it on my Facebook page. And I shared some pretty harsh criticism of it and said that there's a lot of confusion around emergency powers, but most Republican state legislators are making victory laps for, quote, repealing Governor Walz's emergency powers, unquote. However, we did no such thing. We ended the peacetime emergency declaration, which means Walz voluntarily holstered his weapon when he signed the legislation that we passed into law. So which is his self-declared emergency. So he holstered his own weapon, but we did not disarm him. We did not alter Chapter 12.31, which is the law that allows the governor to at any time declare another emergency. Even though we just ended it, by ending the powers, he can redeclare an emergency, giving himself unilateral lawmaking authority. He could do mask mandates. He could do whatever. He could spend money with it. And because we never passed the Never Again bill, this can happen again. And so for Republicans to be making a victory lap out there saying, oh, we did it. He can't issue a mask mandate is absolutely BS. So Pat and I were texting back and forth dozens of times because he was mad that I shared this on social media and was criticizing him. I was actually criticizing all Republicans that are saying that taking this victory lap. But what the gist of it is, he doesn't think that Walz will issue another emergency because it would be politically toxic to do so. And that is true. I can't believe that the mask mandates for schools are even coming forward because it's so politically toxic. But it's happening. And it wouldn't surprise me if he issues another emergency for COVID-21, call it whatever you want, call it the variant, and say this is a different thing and we need to do this so that I can direct this thing or do something because the legislature's not in session.
Well, that's a hell of a bluff he's trying to run, because he's basically putting his money down on the likelihood that Tim Walz is going to restrain himself. And I haven't seen a whole lot of evidence in the past 2 years to substantiate the notion that Tim Walz is a master of self-restraint. I know Pat. Pat used to be my state representative. There was a period of time a few years back when I moved around quite a bit. And for a period of time, I lived in Farmington and got to know Pat a little bit. Nice guy. I enjoy talking to Pat. And I know he's a smart guy. And it's because I know he's a smart guy that I really have to raise an eyebrow with this, because I have a hard time believing that he doesn't understand the points that you're making, that he doesn't understand the distinction between ending a declaration of emergency and truly ending Governor Walz's executive powers. And he's going to look pretty clownish if and when Tim Walz, under the pressure he's going to receive from his constituency that are totally bought into this cultish notion that we're all going to die from the Delta variant or whatever, when they put pressure on him to lock things down again or apply a mask mandate again or whatever it is, if he goes forward with another emergency declaration, the internet is forever, and people are going to be able to pull out this tweet from Pat Garofalo and be like, "I thought you told us it was everything was going to be okay, Pat. What happened?"
Yeah, and I want to add a little bit of more information, kind of further in the weeds to this. In the last day of the special session, in the last bill, and second to last amendment, was an amendment that was an agreed upon thing. We talked about it in the last show, that says for COVID-19. So we ended the emergency declaration, and for COVID-19, the remainder of the state's response needs to be handled by Jan Malcolm, the Commissioner of Health, who's in the Walz administration. But it did not specifically say the governor could not reissue another emergency. And so it was kind of poorly worded. It was in the right direction, but we didn't change Chapter 12. And I brought that up with Pat. In fact, Kurt Dowd stood up on the House floor and he and I got in a fighting match, because he was like, "Munson, you're wrong. This actually greatly expands the governor's powers. It doesn't limit it." And I'm like, it does restrict him a little bit, but it's not good enough. So all of the Republicans, including Pat, voted against that amendment. And so Pat was arguing with me that, no, you don't understand. We passed a law saying he can't do it again. Like, well, we really didn't, but you didn't vote for that amendment, so we kind of got into that debate. But we the bottom line is we have not prevented the governor from issuing an emergency again for a health crisis, and the emergency powers still remain.
Yes.
One of the other things about Pat and four other Republicans in St. Paul, Gazelka, Rosen, Kurt Dowd, and Benson, they are all on this committee of 10 special legislators. Last summer, during a special session, the legislature gave up its authority to handle the response to COVID. Basically, even though we're meeting every month, we're coming back for special sessions, and we can, we were basically in session all the time anyways. We gave up our authority to vote on important spending for COVID-19. And we gave up our authority to this special committee of 10 legislators whose votes were supposed to be on the record, but you didn't find out their votes until a month later. And the committee ended on December 31st last year. And in the final, by the way, one of the votes they took was to buy the morgue. Okay, the $7 million morgue. And every single Republican voted on that committee, voted to buy the morgue, including Kurt Dowd and Pat Garofalo. So they have to, they don't like to really talk about the COVID-19 response and emergency stuff. But the last vote in December 31st was to authorize a no-bid contract, so just one vendor that the governor wanted, to handle the testing response for COVID-19. So this is the testing strategy statewide, how we're going to be doing. Remember those spit in the tube type things? And many of these tests that the CDC now says, or the FDA now says, you can't use these tests because they're not accurate. The contract was authorized by this committee of 10 for Vault Health. Now, Vault Health is named Vault as in pole vaulting because they are kind of a fly-by-night company that did generic erectile dysfunction pills.
Okay.
I'm not kidding. So they're a men's health company, and they basically do online, orders for the little blue pill.
Right.
And they have nothing to do with viruses, virology, epidemiology, testing, whatever. Literally, they're just shipping pills. And they're based in New York State. They're not even a Minnesota company. So when Walz, in the middle of the pandemic, remember in November, December was this huge spike, and it was the biggest spike ever in Minnesota for COVID. They brought in Vault Health, this rinky-dink company from New York State, to manage the COVID testing strategy for the state. Now, who did they choose? Which world-renowned epidemiologist and virologist did they choose from the Mayo Clinic or Abbott or University of Minnesota? They chose world-renowned virologist Dr. Dan Feehan. Oh, wait a minute. He's not a doctor or a virologist. In fact, he's not even worked in healthcare. The guy is a twice-failed congressional candidate in CD1 who was running for Tim Walz's seat when Tim Walz ran for governor. So Dan Feehan was chosen to be the national director of strategy for COVID testing for Vault Health and got this enormous, $30 million contract with the state, which they've already billed $113 million for testing for COVID. And the other person that was hired by Vault Health was Tim Walz's campaign manager. So this is the swamp of the swamp. Now, I requested information on the votes and a copy of the contract through the Freedom of Information Act we have in the state. And that was back in March. And they basically have said they're not going to give it to us because that program has ended.
So what?
They don't. That's exactly right. Give it to us.
Yeah.
But
that has no bearing. That has no bearing on whether or not it's public information. We still have every right to know what our government did.
Yes. In the end of the special session, one of the things that Kiffmeyer got into the final bills and the budget was an agreement that the Office of Legislative Auditor, which is the nonpartisan auditor that works for the legislature, we tell them to investigate CCAP fraud. They do this enormous report and they give it to us pretty nonpartisan. We said in this bill, you must investigate and document and do a full audit on all of the COVID-19 spending during the pandemic and give it to us in a big report. And we want to see all the waste, fraud, and abuse, what the money was used for. And the OLA came back and said, we don't have the budget to do this. It's just too big of an undertaking. And that would include stuff like the stupid morgue that we bought and the money that went to the zoo and all that junk and Vault Health contract. So the only thing I got back from my information request was a contract that I had actually asked for in November or December when they took an empty Gander Mountain in Mankato and leased it to do walk-in. I mean, think of the size of an enormous box store, and that was going to be the COVID testing center for Mankato.
Right.
What do we need a 180,000 square foot box store to do a walk-in clinic and spit in a damn tube?
Right.
So I'm like, I want to see this contract of what we are spending and how long this contract is for this Gander Mountain. And they did give me that contract, but the bigger item here is the hundreds of millions of dollars that they can be, testing and charging the state for. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, where there's smoke, there's fire. And this is just billowing smoke on the horizon. This is a scandal. This is pay for play. This is political favoritism. This is doling out cash money, public dollars stolen from taxpayers to your friends as a political reward, maintaining a fiefdom. That's what it is. We know it.
Well, and Dan Feehan got in trouble. He had an FEC complaint during the last election cycle because that was filed by the Hagedorn campaign because Dan Feehan was employed by several special interest groups during the campaign, which is illegal. You can't just give somebody $80,000 a year salary so that they can sit and run for office. And so he got in trouble for it. Well, this is basically the same thing. I don't even know what work he's doing, but The guy has never worked in healthcare in his life. How can he be?
It's like Hunter Biden. He's not qualified. There's no reason why he should have a position like this. He doesn't work in healthcare. He has no expertise in project management or anything along those lines. So yeah, it's clear as day that there's a scandal here. At the very least, it's clear as day that an investigation is warranted, right? And so my question is, what other options are there aside from asking politely via FOIA request? Is there an opportunity here to get a judge to make a ruling and force their hand?
Well, it would be nice. I think we need to move it to the next step, the next level. Now, Walz has done something really wise with this decision. If you're going to be scandalous and corrupt, you need to involve a lot of other key players. And if you can do so, involve key players on both sides of the political spectrum. So by having, I don't know who voted for this thing, but let's just assume that all of them voted for it, like they voted for the morgue. Gazelka running for governor. If he voted for this no bid contract for Vault Health, that's pretty toxic. Right. Michelle Benson, also rumored to run for governor. If she voted for it, right? Julie Rosen, chair of finance. I mean, Kurt Dowd, Pat Garofalo. I mean, so they have something to protect, and they all can kind of come together and say, maybe we should just bury this. And that's why I just don't think it's going to come out.
Maybe we should just let the governor get away with tens of millions of dollars in graft, because we might have to pay a political price. That's the character of the people you're dealing with.
It's swampy. And I mean, I've discovered this about a lot of stuff in St. Paul where both sides are in on it. And there's just an agreement to screw over the taxpayers. So on that note, I mean, I'm frustrated. I'm so upset. I went on the radio today in Mankato, and it's syndicated across a few areas, to complain about, the Dr. Dan Feehan thing. And I know he's in this area. I mean, supposedly, I know he lives in DC most of the time, but he's running. I believe he's going to be running for Congress again. But we need to talk about this. But there are conservatives that are really, really ticked off. Now, you went to the first conservative fundraiser that I've heard going on. What was your takeaway from this fundraiser?
Yeah, so I just walked in the door from what they're called a Liberty Mix and Mingle, a fundraiser for state reps Eric Lucero, Cal Barr, your good buddy Shane Meckland, and John Heinrich. And Heinrich, of those four, Heinrich was the one I'm least familiar with. I guess he's a freshman. Is that right? Do you know Heinrich at all?
No, I do know him well, and this is his second term.
Okay.
But you're talking about the four of the 10 most conservative legislators in St. Paul. So out of the 200 legislators, these guys are in the top 5 percentile of being the most conservative from their voting records, from all the scorecards.
Yeah, and it attracted a lot of great local activists and members of the Republican/conservative community. People who I haven't seen in a long time. Jim Newberger was there, who has gotten a little grayer since the last time I saw him, which is more of a testament to how long it's been than anything else. And so it was nice to see people.
I heard he's a truck driver now.
Is he?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, hey. You know what I'm doing for a day job. So, we do what we have to do in order to make money. And I wish him the best. He did mention that he had retired from his previous career as I believe he was a paramedic.
Yeah. Ambulance driver.
Yeah. Yep. So at any rate, to get to why you were asking about it, there was a fascinating dynamic that developed during the course of this fundraiser between the honorees or the folks who we were there to support, the legislators, and the crowd. And it started with the legislators. Like when they got up to give their kind of, remarks, legislative update, whatever you want to call it, their stump speeches, they started to insert these sort of preemptive defenses along the lines of, well, there are people out there who say that, we're not doing a very good job because of X, Y, and Z. And there are people out there who would like to tell you that if we'd have done this, that, or the other thing, then things could be better. But, you need to not listen to those people and, yada, yada, which was all kind of, it was interesting because it seemed very defensive for you to come out ahead of criticism and try to head it off at the pass in that way. And sure enough, as soon as the floor opened up to Q&A, this guy got up, and this is somebody who, mind you, is an attendee, presumably paying to attend a fundraiser for these guys. And the first thing he has to say is how he's mad as hell and not going to take it anymore from these guys. Like, he wasn't saying, I'm mad at everybody but you. He was saying, I'm mad at you. I'm including you in the group of people that I am mad at. And the way he phrased it was, you guys are allowing yourselves to be overrun by Hennepin and Ramsey counties. You're allowing yourselves to be basically rickrolled by the Democrats. And I'm very angry and upset about it, and I expect better from you guys. And the response to that from our friends, from Lucero and Barr, kind of took the lead in defending it against this criticism. And both of them kind of had the same message, which was in the form of a question. What would you have us do? Like, specifically, we're not in the majority. We're in the minority in the House. We've done this, we've done that. We've filed court cases that haven't gone anywhere. We've tried different things. The media's against us. And they offered up this kind of familiar litany of institutional obstacles to achieving any of their goals, and put it back on the guy who's upset, saying, what would you have us do that we're not currently doing? And the reason why, what I find fascinating about this dynamic, because I think it's emblematic, if this type of back and forth is happening at a fundraiser, can you imagine what it's going to be like when we get to caucuses and conventions? It's in the air, and this guy wasn't the only guy who had these thoughts.
Can I just a little bit? So, was the issue about the emergency powers? Was it about the budget? Was it about gun rights? Or what was
It wasn't specific. It was based. The sentiment was, you guys are getting your butts handed to you by the left. Why are you letting this happen? Is basically the sentiment.
And they didn't ask about a specific issue, because, when I'm in the minority, and I'm fighting like hell and to do whatever I can to advance stuff. But what's important to me is, if there's an issue that you want, like voter ID, people want voter ID. I need to get everybody in the House, on the floor, on a vote, on a roll call vote. That's my goal. That's as far as I can get it. Now, most conservatives will say, well, it's not going to pass anyways. The governor's not going to sign it. BS. Yep. Get them on the record, push it as far as you can, get it on, get a vote. And if they vote it down, you could bring it up every day or whatever, but you should at least get it that far. So if they're mad about something and we didn't get it to the floor for a vote, they have an absolute right to be upset.
Yeah. And that's kind of my takeaway, is that I think that, because, we know these guys are your friends. These guys are my friends. I don't think that these guys are not, I sense the sincere, deeply held frustration in their voices. And I also, by the way, had a couple conversations with Paul Gazelka, of all people.
I know before the show that you told me he was there, and I can't believe that he showed up to that thing. But did he back out of the party when people were talking about, because he is the only person who is in a position to actually get anything done.
You know what he did is, while this guy was saying his piece, Gazelka kind of shuffled over and was like, "This is your fault to me." He's like, "You're the one who's out there getting all these people riled up." I mean, it was tongue in cheek. He was being friendly, but the Gazelka kind of has similar things to say, right? Of like, you guys need to understand the institutional reality of what we're dealing with, the limitations of what we can achieve, and yada, yada. And look, I'm an elected official. I sit on a city council. I got people who come up to me and ask me why we don't have a Chipotle, as if You know what I'm saying? As if that's something that the city council does. As if we like, it's like Sim City. We just like plunk down a store. Like that's not how it works. But the problem is, and I'm glad that I'm learning this lesson now, just in case the situation ever arises where I try to do something more than what I'm doing now. I'm glad I'm learning this lesson now, because I certainly understand the desire to defend yourself by explaining how things work. As a political response that is toxic, and it is going to kill you, and it is going to ensure that you never win anything ever again. Because people are not looking, people don't come to you, they don't show up at a fundraiser, pay to get into the door, and then grab the mic and shout at you about how they're angry, because they want you to lecture them on the intricacies of parliamentary procedure. That is not what they are looking for. What they are looking for is for you to be at least as angry as they are.
Yeah.
At least as angry. They're looking for leadership. And they want to see that leadership manifest in exactly what you were talking about. Throwing down gauntlets, planting policy flags, like we've talked about so often in this program, where you go out there and you say, this is what we're going to do. And the example that I keep coming back to, my wife and I were talking about on the way back, Donald Trump. Donald Trump almost took this state after decades of statewide failures by Republicans. He almost took it. How? Was it by lecturing people about how, if we get majorities, we might be able to build a wall someday? No, he told people, we're going to build the wall. We're building it. He cast a vision for what life is going to be if you support him. Now, did people believe that by electing Donald Trump, that would just magically put bricks together in an order and you'd have a wall manifest at the southern border? No, nobody thought that. Nobody even had the expectation. Look at how loyal people remain to Donald Trump in spite of the fact that there is no wall. I mean, there's pieces of it that were built here and there, but he didn't deliver. You could argue that Donald Trump didn't deliver on that promise of building the wall. And yet people love him. I drive around this part of the state every day, and I see Trump flags flying proudly, faded in the sun everywhere. People aren't taking them down, and it's clear that they have no intention that they're ever going to. And it's not because he gave them what they wanted. It's because he told them what he was for. People came out and voted for Donald Trump because Donald Trump was for something. And he didn't have excuses. He didn't come up to people. He didn't go around to a rally and sit there, imagine tens of thousands of people coming to, a stadium or wherever he's having a rally. And he spends 20 minutes explaining to them about parliamentary politics in Washington, D.C. That place would empty out in a cold minute.
Yeah.
He went there and he told them, this is what I'm for. This is what we're going to do. And we're going to get it done no matter what. Follow me. Let's conquer that hill. Let's go take that field. Let's do it. Let's battle. Let's get after it. And it's not about being academic and being a statesman and being there needs to be a certain degree of passion and a certain degree of rhetorical and emotional leadership that inspires people to do something, and specifically to follow you, to support you, to vote for you, to support your cause. And, if guys would get this, these guys are friends, if it would click in their heads that that's what people are looking for, and they started acting accordingly, we could turn this state red.
Well, I certainly think that Cal Barr, and I've listened to the guy speak at BPOU events and stuff, he gets passionate. But I also know that Cal Barr is getting awfully sick of defending why we're not getting stuff done.
Sure.
Cal Barr doesn't take orders from anybody. He votes liberty all the time. And you get sick of activists that are misinformed by a couple of outside groups who maybe, with using your model, say we're gonna do the Mortensen Never Again bill, which is we went through this whole thing. It's not really constitutional, violates a ton of federal stuff. It's like it's a bad bill. great idea, bad bill, but it's never going to get through. But he's bringing people on this ride that they want to get it done. I went to a BPOU meeting yesterday, and I went to one event in Mankato by an outside group called Make Minnesota Great Again, and they had Doug Wardlow come in, and there was like 40 people there, excited, passionate. And then I went over to a BPOU meeting in Waseca County in Janesville, where they brought in Dennis Smith, also running for Attorney General, and Mike Murphy running for governor. And I was wearing a Gadsden flag T-shirt and shorts. I got up there and I'm mad at what happened in the legislature. And I said, we didn't solve the emergency powers because Republicans chose not to make it the issue that they were willing to shut down the government for. They could have actually got it done, but they chose not to. It was a decision by leadership to not make this an issue. They could have made voter ID. They could have shut the state down over voter ID. In fact, they probably should have, but they didn't make it an issue. And I went through this, stuff, how we failed you. And then John Petersburg, who's I share Waseca County with, he got up to give a legislative update, and he talked about, how he got a highway named in honor of a fallen soldier, or a little stretch of it, and, some highway funding stuff and some different things that he got done. But, it was like night and day between our legislative updates. But you could tell that people that were really upset and, were cheering me on when I was talking about how we failed them, that's what they want to hear. You're absolutely right. And they know we're in the minority. They know that the numbers are against us, but, they follow me on social media. They see that I'm out there punching all the time, fighting the governor, fighting, the majority Democrats in the House, and they want a fighter in St. Paul.
Absolutely. What people want is to be understood and represented. And those two things go hand in hand, right? I can't represent you if I don't understand you. And so when activists, and forget activists, constituents, just people, when anybody comes up to you with a political concern and your response is to explain to them why they shouldn't have that concern or why they're wrong to have it, the only message you're getting across, the only actual thing that you're telling them is that you don't understand them. And the application of that understanding is that you can't represent them. And so they're going to look for somebody else to do it. And that's why, that's why we don't have the turnout that we need in outstate. The guy's point was you're getting rickrolled by Hennepin and Ramsey County. Yeah. You know why? Well, there's lots of reasons why, but one of the chief ones is you're not getting the turnout that you need outstate. And the reason you're not getting the turnout that you need outstate is because a lot of people feel exactly like this guy who showed up tonight. They're angry. They're ticked off. They're mad as hell. They're not going to take it anymore. And what we mean by not take it anymore is they're not going to show up to vote. They're not gonna open their checkbook any more than's required to get a microphone for 2 seconds to shout at these guys. You know what I'm saying? And so the goal has to be, it cannot be, and I've been close enough to all of these guys and the process over the course of these years to be able to say authoritatively that I know this is how they think. This is how leadership thinks. This is how your rank and file Republican state legislator thinks. They all think in terms of process and like short-term parliamentary strategy and electoral memes like, well, we can't do that because then the Democrats are going to say this, or if we do that, we should only do this if it's going to lead to us being able to make this case against that Democrat in the next election. And it's this kind of, I don't even know what to compare it to, but it's very, they don't understand the nature of the fight that they're in. This is not a fight where the smartest guy wins. This is not a fight where the guy who makes the best argument wins. This is not a fight where the guy who is right objectively, morally, scientifically wins. Being right means precisely nothing in politics. Politics is entirely about will. It's about having the will to back up your agenda. And you can only, the left understands this. Is there anything rational about any of their strategies or proposals? Of course not. They propose the most ridiculous concepts in the world. Men can have babies, right? And they just throw it out there. They're just like, oh yeah, that's what we believe now, right? And nobody buys it. Nobody believes it. They don't even believe it, but they throw it out there and they just stand on it. And they planted that flag and they're like, here we are, come at us, bro. And our side sits there and tries to argue it. You're not going to be able to defeat them in a debate. You have to defeat them by channeling the emotion. And it's so counterintuitive for conservatives because we tend to be more intellectually minded and to be more analytical. But we got to get over that, because even though we tend in that direction, we're still human beings, and human nature is such that the things that animate us are the things that appeal to our emotions.
There are several issues that conservatives are really steaming upset about. The emergency powers, we've talked about this ad nauseum on this show. Gun rights, obviously, with Biden and the Democrats in control of DC, they are coming after our guns, and so we have to fight like hell. The California car mandates is one of the things that in rural Minnesota people are really upset about, and that was brought up at both meetings I was at. And so, I told them that my honest truth. It wasn't an issue for leadership. It was an issue for leadership, but leadership made a political decision to give Walz California car mandates so that he could campaign on that. And Gazelka, or whoever's running for governor, can actually try to hang Walz with it, because Walz going to rural Minnesota after just, pushing through his California car mandates unilaterally and it doesn't go into effect until 2024, gives the Republicans something to campaign on. But if we lose, we have California car mandates, and right. So it was a bad decision to give him that. But I explained it to people as it was a political decision by leadership. Wasn't my thing, but leadership made the decision. People can kind of see how sometimes if you let Walz hang himself with I got to stop using that term, hang himself. If you let Walz drill holes in his boat with every executive order, it's gonna sink his campaign. And so there are things you can let him have on bad policy that just you think it's going to be so toxic. But the one thing that is inexcusable that we did not get through is election integrity, is voter ID. Because if you don't have election integrity, if you can't restore people's faith in elections, you will always lose, right? Walz could have the dumbest campaign. He could defund police. He could be a tyrant. And as long as he can count the ballots and is in control of the ballot box, then we'll lose. It'll be like Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that story you told is a perfect indicator of the flipped priorities that Republicans tend to have, particularly when they ascend to leadership. So that trade by Gazelka or whoever with Walz to give Walz what he wants on policy in exchange for an electoral talking point, what that tells me is that you value the electoral talking point above the policy.
Well, I want to say, I don't think he just gave Walz California car mandates so that he could have that as a campaign thing. He gave him that in exchange for some tax relief on some other stuff, or, it was part of a negotiation, but knowing that, I'll give him this, and I'll be able to campaign on that crap, that was, it was the same thing came up with John Thompson. I talked about Representative John Thompson, who, by the way, has decided he is not resigning from office. And people were like, when are you filing an ethics complaint? And I said, look, I didn't even sign on to Lucero's ethics complaint because it's all about, hurt feelings, being called a racist. I don't want to play that game. But for the driver's license stuff, in beating his wife and things like that, I explained to people that having John Thompson around is actually good for Republicans. It's like having Ilhan Omar running for, Congress. As much as you don't like her, she drags their party off the cliff. And sometimes that's a good thing for campaigns. So Representative Thompson is not getting any of his policy through. He is crazy far left, but it's actually beneficial to our cause to have him in office. And so let his constituents throw him out if they don't think he lives in the district, because we found out there actually isn't a requirement that you live in your district after you're elected. But as far as filing an ethics complaints, let the Democrats expunge him. And perhaps if they expunge him for beating his wife, then they'll also have to expunge Ellison.
Yeah, I mean your reasoning there is sound in that you're not trading a policy loss for a possible electoral victory. And I guess that's what I'm getting after, is that the priority of Republicans seems to be the next election, the next election, the next election, whereas the priority for Democrats is always policy, policy, policy. And to my mind, that difference is what animated that gentleman to get up tonight and scream at Eric Lucero and Cal Barr and Shane Mecklen, because he's frustrated when he says you're getting rickrolled. It's because the concern that when you always defer to, we need the majority, we need the governor's office, we need this, we need that, and then maybe we'll be able to get something done. It's not a particularly inspirational message, but it also demonstrates that that's where your focus lies. And you're trying to turn the focus of your supporters and constituents from what they want done to giving you more power. And it's never going to happen in that order. You're never going to get more power and then get something done. You need to get something done in order to prove that you deserve more power. And what I mean by get something, because I know the counter is going to be, well, how can we get anything done when we don't have the majority? I'm not talking about getting a law passed. I'm talking about doing what Donald Trump did, telling us this is what your vision is. This is what we want to do. And these people are standing in your way. Get them out of there. Support us. Bring more people in here who think like us, and we'll be able to build that wall or whatever it is. The thing that you're getting done is just casting the vision. That's really all you have to do, is cast the vision of this. Come achieve this with me. Come help me get this done. And, like you said, with your experience, taking responsibility for it. We failed you by not doing this and not doing that, because what that does is it validates the feelings. Again, we're talking about emotion. It validates the feelings of the people who are upset with you, that yes, you have a right to be upset. You have not gotten what you want, and you should have. And it also demonstrates that you understand and share their priorities. We failed you because we didn't do X, Y, and Z that you want. And so now they know that you understand that they want X, Y, and Z. And so they're going to be inclined to help you and support you and get more people up there like you, because they now have reason to believe that means they will get X, Y, and Z.
Nope, I agree. I mean, we're on the same line here. And I think more legislators need to understand that they can go out to their communities and talk about dysfunction in St. Paul, but in doing that, we would really have to advocate for new leadership, and that's really one of my problems. We talked about, obviously, with Kurt Dowd and just how toxic he is for the House. Just to give people an update too, last episode we talked about a Senate Majority Leader election. Although they caucused this week in the Senate, they did not elect a new Majority Leader. Tom Bach is still being talked about, but I think that it looks like Jeremy Miller is kind of leading the choice for new Majority Leader, and Jeremy Miller is not as conservative as Paul Gazelka. I think you could safely say that. He's from a very blue district down in Winona. And if Jeremy Miller was not the senator in Winona, I don't think we would be able to elect a Republican in that district. But Jeremy Miller started the Purple Caucus, I think, with Julie Rosen, kind of a moderate.
Didn't you tell us last week that you want somebody who's in a solid red district to be your caucus leader because they need to be able to focus their attention on raising money for everybody else rather than defending themselves in their own district?
Yeah, and that's, when Tom Bach was the Democrat majority leader, and he supports the pipeline and mining, and so the Democrats, the crazy left Democrats, threw him out as majority leader and chose Susan Kent to be their new majority leader. She's in a tough district. I think Mary Giuliani Stevens ran against her and had a really good shot of winning. So you would draw attention to yourself being in a swing district. And yeah, I think you should be in a deep red district. And of course, I think Republicans want the leader of the Republican majority to actually be a bold conservative and, be leading on these issues, not starting from the middle. And so that's my concern about Jeremy Miller. I mean, the guy's a nice guy personally, but he's not a conservative for voting, and therefore I just don't think he's going to be a good majority leader if that's who they select.
Well, and again, in light of the conversation we just had, what is the signal that you are sending to your supporters and your constituents and the activists? Again, you're saying, we don't get it. We don't understand you. We're gonna put up this guy to lead us who doesn't share any of your values, doesn't think like you at all, and he's going to be our leader. We're going to follow him.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you just ask it to get kicked in the teeth.
It's no different than almost every Republican in the House voted in the special session to say that people that work for legislators that work for lobbying firms are breaking the law, and it's unethical. And yet Kurt Dowd still he's still the minority leader of the House and works for a lobbying firm. How is that going to look if they don't choose a different leader in the House? How is that going to look for re-election for vulnerable freshmen or vulnerable anybody in the Republican side? We need to get our house in order. We need to bring people back together on the conservative side, and we need to find the right leaders in both the House and the Senate that are going to be conservative. I wanted to touch on. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I like what Jay Dugan, who runs rocksandcows.org, I like what he has to say about this, because we were having a conversation at one point on another program where I made some comment along the lines of, these guys need to be out of the party. They need to go away. We need to get rid of these people. In a moment of frustration, I was saying, we need to get rid of people who aren't on the same page with us on these issues and these priorities. And he corrected me, and he was right to correct me. He's like, no, he's like, we want them. He's like, for years, they've been telling us that we need to shut up and support them. It's time for us to tell them to shut up and support us. And there it is right there. Somebody's going to lead and somebody's going to follow. And for the longest time, it's been the moderates and the squishes telling the conservatives, calm down, rabble, you need to follow us. And arguing, Team Red, we need to come together and be a united front in order to defeat the Democrats under their moderate leadership. Well, it's time to flip that script. It's time for them to follow us, for them to give us our turn at the head of this particular, caravan, so that we can move this thing in the right direction. Of course, it's yet to be seen whether or not they would actually be willing to do that. And based upon how they've treated folks like yourself, I think we know what that answer is. Their prescription for party unity and putting differences aside and coming together for Team Red, it only applies when they're the ones who are at the lead asking us to follow, never the other way around.
Well, I've had lots of conversations from people that say, we need 30 more of you in St. Paul. We need, like for the conservatives. And I said, you don't need 30 more. You need like just 10 more. And, if we could, because we have 18 to 20 conservatives that vote as a block a lot of times. If you look at the votes, you can, just statistically, you just look at the numbers and you can figure out, 18 to 20 people vote conservatively most of the time. Maybe 10 stick to their guns all the time. If we got 10 more, then you have a majority of, the Republicans. And I would say the majority of Republicans in St. Paul right now just follow. They just vote like they're told to vote. Make the case, hey, you should vote this way, or, we need to vote this way because, this person, Bobby needs to come back, and this, they need this for their district, and they follow along. But if you had a large group of conservatives in St. Paul that can set the policy, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to get, voter integrity back, and we're going to, expand gun rights, and we're going to do this. They would be with us. They would vote with us. One of the hardest things to do is what we're doing right now for me, explaining my votes, explaining policy, teaching people, bringing the St. Paul to people, bringing the legislature to people through social media, through any kind of medium. And it's very difficult. It takes a lot of time. And a lot of legislators just don't want to spend the time explaining everything. And so they let the caucus say, well, this is going to be the caucus position. And then we will send out press releases for you, and we will create graphics to promote what we did. And we'll say this, and we'll give you a little book at the end of session that explains. So when you go to a town hall, you can flip to that page and read verbatim what the leader says that we did for that policy. And it's easy legislating. So we just need to build a smaller group of, a larger group of conservatives, but you don't need to have everybody in St. Paul be a conservative. You just need people there to lead and create a larger block. And we're working on that, but we have to come together as conservatives and not be, fighting each other like what's happening in some of these, with some of these outside groups.
Well, and I'll raise the comparison of Donald Trump again, just because he's such an apt and easily understood comparison. When Donald Trump was at his zenith, when he ran and became president of the United States, the moderates fell in line. Like everybody became, and I'll tell you, we haven't necessarily talked about it a whole lot on this show, but people who've followed my commentary for any length of time are well aware of the fact I did not start off as a Donald Trump fan. In fact, I was probably the most vocal never Trump Republican in Minnesota during the 2016 campaign. And so, I have a unique perspective on this process, and having observed it over the past few years, I can tell you, I won't betray confidences, but I can tell you for a fact that people in positions, prominent positions throughout the party, names that you would know, were right there with me. They were right there with me in, this is horrible for our party. This is terrible. We can't have this guy. This is going to be a big problem. They would say that to me, but they didn't say it to you. They didn't say it publicly. And as soon as he became president, as soon as it became clear that he was going to be the nominee and he was going to be president of the United States after Election Day, they all flipped, and they were all like, Team Trump, put on the MAGA hat, right? And I tell that story not just to highlight the flip-floppy nature of your average politician, but to demonstrate the fact that true leadership, like the type that Donald Trump exhibited, puts these moderates in a position where they have no choice but to follow. And that goes to your point too. You don't need to have 30 guys down there. If you got a handful, if you got 10, 20, however many, who are all being Trumpy in a sense, meaning not necessarily that they're acting exactly like Donald Trump, but that they're all casting this vision, and that they're all speaking in lofty rhetorical terms that drives people to get up out of their seat and follow, then that's going to create a movement that forces the moderates to get on the gravy train, because there's going to be nowhere else for them to go.
And just to put things in perspective, to actually put numbers to this, if people are asking, well, how many do we need? If Republicans take the majority in the Minnesota House and Senate, and the political winds are at our back right now in this midterm election, where Democrats ran the gamut, and Republicans are upset and Democrats are complacent. So we have a very good likelihood of taking the majority in the House and keeping the Senate. And if we can take the majority, let's say we have 10 conservatives in St. Paul in the Minnesota House, and we take the majority. If we have a majority plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, then, and we decide we lock arms and say, we're not passing anything until you give us voter ID, until you give us constitutional carry, and you just say what you want, and you're willing to shut the government down, then you can get anything you want. This is what the Posse Caucus, the crazy left caucus, does, because they have a large number of people in the Posse Caucus that's larger than the margin to make the Democrats in the majority. So the only risk to that is if the leader can reach over across the aisle and get Democrats to vote with the Republicans to block you. But if you can have a large enough, number and a large enough block, you can demand what things should be done. This is what the Freedom Caucus does in Washington, D.C. when the Republicans were in the majority. But this is what we need. We just need, 10, strong spine conservatives who will toe the line. And that's what we were building. That's what we are building in the new House Republican Caucus, people that are, principled and don't kowtow to leadership.
I'll give you another example, a local example that may seem counterintuitive for us to raise. Eric Mortensen. Look at how much rabble Eric Mortensen has been able to rouse as one dude. Now, not always to the delight of his friends, yourself included, not always to the delight of me, frankly. But it demonstrates the point that one guy who says, nah, and means it, one guy who's like, nah, I ain't going there. I'm going this way. This is what I stand for. Win, lose, or draw. That is powerful. And so if you've got 10 guys who are willing to do that, and there's some degree of coordination between them, yeah, you can really make some things happen. And this is why, talking about how you need to win the majority and you need to get the governor's office and all these arguments that don't move anybody, don't inspire anybody, and don't get anything done. You need to move off of all those arguments and be talking about fostering what you're talking about, a committed core of warriors who are intent upon doing what's right in St. Paul, win, lose, or draw.
Well, I guess I would, to argue against your point on Mortensen, I don't think Mortensen is the one man that's effective. I think that I give credit to Action for Liberty and North Star Liberty Alliance for the marketing genius and the activists, getting people, building the lists and, running the PR campaign for their, champion legislator, fill in the blank, whoever that is. But what I'm describing to have the majority is simple numbers. You don't have to be a loudmouth to enact those policies as long as you have the election certificate that's needed, right? It's a numbers game. It isn't who's the loudest person in St. Paul. It's literally, you could be the quiet group of conservatives and just be like, I'm sorry, but I'm not voting for it. And you can't buy my vote. You can't build an overpass, a freeway overpass in my district, or give me a roundabout in exchange for my vote, right?
Yeah, but unfortunately, that requires a degree of moral courage to take that position. And I guess that's what I'm getting after, is that, whether you want to argue whether it's warranted or not, you do have to say it takes some degree of moral courage to stand alone in defiance of literally everybody and say, no, I'm not going there. I'm going this way over here. And that's the type of spirit that's required in order to achieve what you're describing.
Yeah. And I guess once you take that position that I'm voting no on this bill and you can't twist my arm, then the establishment throws everything at you. And at that point, you do have to stand up and have that courage. And we went through that too when we started our own caucus. And it was just like, it was cold shoulders from everybody, the heat coming down on us, even the party getting upset for what we're doing and trying to stand on principle. But we got through it. And Mortensen, same thing. He's taken a lot from a lot of people, and he's going to have a tough reelection and have to answer to that. But yeah, he, between his megaphone and Action for Liberty and North Star and these other groups that are supporting him, you're right. we need more of these people in St. Paul. I wanted to talk about one other quick news article. In Mankato, the city of North Mankato decided to provide swim lessons to the Somali community. There was a public pool. There was a drowning of a young Somali youth who didn't know how to swim. And so the city, by public policy, is saying, if you're Somali, you can come and get free swim lessons. And I shared it as kind of a tongue-in-cheek public service announcement. If you're Somali, the city of North Mankato will be paying for free swim lessons to prevent future drownings. And I took a lot of heat. In fact, there were some conservatives that shared it and, called me a RINO and a sellout and everything. It's like, no, you don't like.
I understood what you were getting after with that post, but I can see where people would take it the wrong way.
And then, all the comments, of course, were, just negative. Like, what the heck? Why are we, why is this not a racist policy? Can they even do this? Is it constitutional? Can you discriminate in such a way? It was, I don't know. Do you think the city could do this in St. Michael or Albertville?
Well, I mean, I would certainly stand against it if the policy was raised, and I would stand against it both morally as a very explicit racial and ethnic discrimination, but also on constitutional grounds. Like you have to have equal treatment under the law when it comes to racial categories, and this is explicitly not that. But also it's also, think about how patronizing and infantilizing it is in response to the death of a Somali in a swimming pool who couldn't swim. Your presumption coming out of that is, well, they all can't swim.
Yeah.
They must all need swimming lessons.
Yeah.
So let's come up with a policy that gives them all swimming lessons. Like that is the most condescending, patronizing, disrespectful, and dare I say, racist premise that you could offer for a public policy, and yet that's what they did.
Yeah, there was a similar program in Minneapolis when young Somali girls didn't want to swim with, or were not allowed to swim with boys, and so they had like a separate day for Somalis, and then they wanted to wear what do they call them, burkinis, or basically a full length, head covering, whatever. And it was at the YMCA, Young Men's Christians Association pool, which I thought was interesting. Another article that came out of the Mankato Free Press was that the city is using COVID dollars to create not COVID dollars. They're using money from the sales tax revenue for the Clean Water Fund to pay for a camp for youth to, quote, find their social justice voices. So it's a camp empowers youth to find their social justice voices. And the article interviews these young 12 and 13-year-old kids at the camp who want to talk about LGBT, Black Lives Matter, women's rights, which I'm assuming is abortion rights. And I mean, it's just, it's infuriating. We've had lots of debates at the legislature about this money. This is back, I don't know, what's that, 20 years ago. A sales tax increase was passed for clean water, to buy land, and there was some arts and heritage cultural fund money. And so every year it's like $600 million that gets doled out by the legislature to different regional arts councils and to buy land and stuff. And they create, you saw that big mural they created with Donald Trump in the pipeline, and they had Nazis dressed up as police officers, and Donald Trump was grabbing all these women, and the police were hosing down black protesters and stuff. And that was paid for by the taxpayer money. They hired a Wisconsin computer programmer to create software to show people how to blow up pipelines. There's basically political art, right? And I would love to say you can't use this money, taxpayer money, for political crap, but I don't know. What do you think about sending these kids to a political activism school?
Well, I mean, look, so there's this cognitive dissonance in our understanding of the First Amendment in particular when it comes to the Establishment Clause, the idea that the federal government, as originally written, what they were saying is that the federal government doesn't get to have a church. That's what they were saying. The federal government can't decide that this is going to be the state religion now, and you all have to follow it. That was the purpose of the Establishment Clause. But it has been twisted and bastardized over the decades and centuries to the point now where the belief is that what it means is that you can't have any sort of taxpayer support for any form of specifically Judeo-Christian expression. Because you can pray to Allah all you want from any public square and nobody's going to stop you, right? It's specifically Judeo-Christian religious expression. We can't have prayer in the school. We can't have prayer, on the House floor or the floor of Congress if it's explicitly directed to Jesus Christ. This is what they believe that the Establishment Clause is for. But the actual root of what the First Amendment is getting after with its prohibition on a state-mandated religion, and what all of the clauses within the First Amendment is getting after, is your freedom of conscience. Freedom of conscience in all its forms, which means that you should neither prohibit or mandate expression of any kind, one way or the other. So not only should there not be a state-funded artistic expression of, Trump as a Nazi, or a Trump-funded or a state-funded camp where we send children to learn how to find their social justice voices. There shouldn't be a state-funded anything that involves speech. There shouldn't be NPR. There shouldn't be PBS. Going down this path long enough, you eventually come around to things like there shouldn't be public education as we know it, where it's just this one big pile of money and you give it to these adults who get to decide that they're going to teach whatever their values are. That is, in effect, an establishment of religion. And so I think this story trips upon something more fundamental than merely, what you see at face value. We're finding ourselves at the bottom of a slippery slope that started many, many decades ago in this country.
Well, I would love to see, I don't know, like Ben Doerr's kids go to this camp and decide they're going to take on the cause of, some conservative, gun rights thing, or, right. Just fill in the blank on a conservative cause, and that kid would probably be ejected from the camp.
Yeah. Absolutely. Look, the reason why, and this all goes back to critical theory and Marxist thought and the conflict between the oppressors and the oppressed. The reason why you can pray to Allah on the floor of Congress, but not Jesus Christ, is because Christians are in the oppressor group and Muslims are in the oppressed group. It's all about the victimology hierarchy, the totem of oppression. And so it's not a standard that's applied objectively to all comers, regardless, blind to who they are or what they represent. It's very explicitly a discriminatory viewpoint that says we have decided arbitrarily that you're the bad guys, so you don't get to speak. You don't get to be subsidized. These other guys who we've arbitrarily decided are the good guys, they do get to speak. They do get to be subsidized. And that is definitionally tyranny, and it's also an explicit violation of the 14th Amendment that we just allow to happen everywhere. It's amazing to me, for all of the self-congratulation we do in this country over how we ended slavery and we ended Jim Crow and the civil rights movement wasn't it grand and the 14th Amendment, for all the self-congratulatory nonsense that we bluster about as if we've done something amazing. Our current public policy at almost every level of government across the country involves explicit violations of equal treatment under the law, usually along racial grounds.
We need more constitutional conservatives in city councils, I think. I mean, we need, when I went to these 2 meetings yesterday and got to talk to a lot of activists and people that are coming in because they want to take their state back, it isn't just about who's running for Congress or who's running for state rep. It's at every level. School boards, talked about that at both meetings. We need to recruit people to run for every school board seat, every city council seat, every county commissioner seat, and apply the same principles to each one. Is this even the role of government? That should be the first question you ask. Is this the role of government? And and then is there a better way to do this? Private sector, whatever. Why are we getting involved and just constantly push towards limited government? Well, Walter, we've got a great wrap up here for the show. I think we've got a lot of good material, and I'm sure there will be more and more issues coming up in the next week, especially as these campaigns kick off. I would encourage everybody to get out and meet the statewide candidates. There's several people running for governor. There's 3 attorney general candidates. There's 1 secretary of state candidate, and we need to find a state auditor. I don't know, that's the unglorified position, but it is a member of the executive council, should the emergency powers be evoked again.
And we could certainly use some auditing in the state, yes. So that would be great. That'd
be nice. That would be really nice. So thank you, Walter, again for joining me for another episode, and we'll have more next week.